Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Legends of the Jedi. So before we begin today, I want to apologize for the delay in releasing this episode. In our previous episode, I promised you that I would get an episode out once every week or two. Well, that turned out not to be the case. So to my 5 to 6 loyal listeners, I sincerely apologize. In the words of C-3PO, "Curse my metal body, I wasn't fast enough." If it just so happens that you're listening to this podcast years from now, well then you won't even know the difference anyway, because by then, all of the episodes will have hopefully been released. Okay, let's do a recap. Last episode, we were introduced to the Golden Age of the Sith in all of its glory. We met some very important Sith Lords. First off, we met the conservative-minded Ludo Kressh, and then we met his progressive, sorceress rival, Naga Sadow. They nearly fought to the death at the funeral of the former Dark Lord Marka Ragnos. But before a victor could be determined, Gav and Jori Daragon crashed the funeral in their ship, the Starbreaker 12. Gav and Jori were immediately thrown in jail on the planet Ziost. Now, if you remember, Ziost is kind of like the capital of the Sith Empire. It's this ice planet where all the Sith Lords congregate to meet and deliberate on all the important things that need to be decided on behalf of the Empire. So this is where the Sith Lords meet to discuss and deliberate on the fate of Gav and Jori. Naga Sadow sees this as an opportunity to make a grab for power. He gathered his loyal Massassi warriors and he staged a jailbreak, killing the Sith Lord Simus in the process. Then he made the crime scene look like Gav and Jori had been sprung by Republic forces. Our last episode ended with Sadow declaring war on the Republic, and much to his rival Ludo Kressh's horror, the entire Council of Sith Lords rallied behind him. So Sadow is now the new Dark Lord of the Sith. And that's where we start things. Okay, so with that recap out of the way, hop onto your speeder bikes and follow me into the end of the Golden Age. Part 4 of the Golden Age of the Sith is titled Pawns of a Sith Lord. The issue opens with Sadow undergoing an initiation ritual. He's decked out in armor, and there's a prominent eye symbol on the center of his chest piece. And if you use Google search, Google Sadow and you'll see the artistic renditions typically feature him wearing this iconic armor with the big eye symbol in the middle of the chest piece. And I encourage listeners to Google some of these names and places so that they can get a better visual representation of what they look like, because my descriptions can only go so far. A friend suggested I throw up some of the harder to spell names in the description of each episode, so I'm going to try and do that moving forward. Back to Sadow, 2 Sith Lords are standing over him with a pyramid-shaped crystal container. When they open the container up, they dump out 2 scorpions onto Sadow's forehead. The scorpions immediately begin to do their work, and they use their sharp tails to mark up Sadow's forehead. Eventually, their work done, they fall over dead, and Sadow sits up. While the smoke rises from his forehead, he proclaims to everyone present that he is now truly the Dark Lord of the Sith. At this point, we flash to Coruscant, and this is actually our first glimpse of the galactic capital, 5,000 years before we see it on the big screen in The Phantom Menace. The planet is still covered in buildings, but we see quite a few pyramid structures and ornate spires. It's clear that these were drawn to give it a more ancient feel, and I think it actually works pretty well. Empress Teta, who's standing at the helm of her ship, informs the Starport Authority that she has requested an opportunity to speak to the government on Coruscant, and she mentions that she comes with 2 Jedi who bear news of great importance. Looking out the viewport, our old Jedi friend Odan mentions how he's never been to Coruscant before, and he's amazed at how vibrant and full of life it is. Empress Teta explains to him how the Republic is in a glorious period of expansion, and now that she has unified the 7 worlds in the Koros system, they can contribute to this Golden Age. And it's a bit ironic to see this term thrown about here, because we saw the Sith use it earlier, but it was clear from last issue that the Sith Empire is on the decline, and here in the Republic, we get a real sense that there is an actual Golden Age. Coruscant's a boomtown, think New York City at the turn of the 20th century. The panels of the comic literally show buildings being constructed as Empress Teta's ship lands. Once Odan steps off the ship, he continues to marvel at the sights to be seen. With so many living creatures on one planet, he tells us that the Force is very strong on Coruscant. Empress Teta's Jedi advisor Memit Nadill cautions him to not let his fascination blind him, which is a very Jedi thing to say. I mean, come on Nadill, let the guy enjoy the sights. This is his first time on the planet. Anyway, both of them follow Empress Teta to the Senate chambers. They're ushered into what appear to look like open-air ancient Greek auditoriums. Once again, we're 5,000 years before the Senate chambers, so we don't see the floating pods that we see in the prequel movies. It's a literal ancient Greek auditorium. Odan tells Empress Teta that he should be the one to deliver the message, but she's all like, hold up, this is my arena. Let me speak the politics. I have a better chance of convincing these people than you do. They're not going to believe that there's a threat if it's coming from you. So with that, Empress Teta steps forward to address everyone present, and this is what she says. Esteemed colleagues of the Republic, I come to you bearing grave news, a dire warning of a threat that may soon be upon us. My Jedi, Odan has received a sending, a vision that tells of a great danger from the past, the Lords of the Sith Empire. Exiled Jedi defeated millennia ago, and now poised to come back and destroy this very Republic. Well, the senators waste no time cutting in and heckling her. Doesn't the Republic have enough problems without these ridiculous stories? Even one of the Jedi observers pipes up and explains how they don't have enough Jedi watchmen throughout the Republic to guard every system. One of the senators comes forward and he's like, You can't be serious, Empress Teta. That we should sound a call to arms? Because your young pup had a bad dream about a mythical enemy? Boh, the very thought. The Empress is like, look, I can't force you to prepare, but you'd be wise to consider the possibility before it's too late. You know, she's like the scientist in those disaster movies that nobody ever listens to. So she turns to Odan and she says, all isn't lost. I intend to summon my own forces, and we're going to prepare for this. From here, we turn to Naga Sadow's hidden fortress on the moon of Shian. If you remember from last episode, he hid Gav and Jori here after he sprung them out of jail. Well, it looks like Gav may have traded one jail cell for another. Sadow has apparently told him that he's not a prisoner, yet he's still stuck in a bare room and he's been separated from his sister. Kinda sounds like a prisoner to me. Anyway, Gav is bored, and here we learn that Sadow has been teaching him some techniques. He decides to use this time to practice his quote-unquote strong undeveloped talent. He puts on a gauntlet with an amulet, kind of infinity stone type thing mounted on the back of it, and he uses it to conjure up 2 fire snakes. They almost kind of look like miniature dragons. While he does this, he reflects on how different this is from the skills of an old Jedi who tried to teach him the ways of the Force when he was younger. And so here we get a bit more backstory for Gav. We learn that he does actually have some formal Force training. But as Yoda might say, a bit of Force training does not a Jedi make. So he's still kind of a blank slate that Sadow can impress upon and mold in his own image if he ever wanted to. The snakes that Gav conjured up eventually turn into an image of his sister Jori, and then from there they turn into an image of Sadow. At that moment, Sadow literally walks forth through the conjuration and dispels it. Gav is surprised. He didn't even hear the Sith Lord come in. Sadow asks how his studies are going. Gav says they're coming along, but what he really wants is to know when he can go home and when he can see his sister. Sadow brushes aside these questions. He reminds Gav that he has a powerful innate talent and that he must learn Sith magic in order to be a strong ally in the coming struggle. We eventually learn that Sadow has only taught Gav the rudimentary basics of Sith magic. It's clear he's holding back, because this is one of those things where we don't want the student surpassing the master too quickly, now do we? So here it is, people. Sadow the Sith sorcerer revealed. He's literally teaching arcane Sith magics to Gav. We can see that in this ancient era, the powers of the dark side have a much more fantastical element to them. You know, they're almost magical in nature. Anyways, leaving Gav behind, Sadow retreats to his throne room to brood over his master plan. In these panels, we learn a bit more about Sith society. It's broken down into several castes or classes. We have the meek and servile slave class, and then there's the intelligent and nimble engineer class. There's others who interbred with the exiled Jedi, such as Ludo Kressh's ancestors, and caused the watering down of powerful bloodlines. I just want to point out that those are not my words. They're straight from the page of the comic, the watering down of powerful bloodlines. And then there's what Sadow considers to be the most useful members of all. The vicious Massassi warrior class, those pure-blooded Sith. So Sadow gets up from his throne and stalks off to confront his Massassi warriors. We learn that Ludo Kressh is guarding the captured Republic ship, Starbreaker 12, and Sadow sees this now as an opportunity to flush out the weakness in the Empire and cauterize it. Well, the weakness in the Empire in this case would be Ludo Kressh, and getting cauterized doesn't sound very fun to me, so if I were Ludo, I would probably be watching my back. At this point, the narrative brings us to Sadow's decoy fortress on the nearby planet of Khar Dhelba. And yes, you heard me right, the guy has a decoy fortress. This is where he's been keeping Jori Daragon, in much less nicer conditions than her brother, I might add. You know, she's like actually in a dank cell, hovering under a blanket for warmth, and scratching down the days on the wall with a rock like in one of those prison movies. When Sadow enters her cell, she demands to see Gav. Well, he starts by telling her that this is for her own safety, as there are those in the Empire who want to kill her and her brother. He explains that this is the very reason why he split them up. Jori tells him that she needs to get back to the Starbreaker 12 because it contains the coordinates back to Republic space. Without it, she has no way of knowing how to get back home. Sadow's like, look, I got you covered. I made some rather extreme arrangements. Flash to the impound hangar on Ziost, and we see Sadow's Massassi warriors are laying waste to Kressh's guards. They're slaughtering them left and right. One of the guards recognizes Sadow's emblem. It's similar to the eye on the chest piece that he wears. It's a circle, and there are 2 flares on either side of the circle, and this emblem, it's worth pointing out, actually becomes the official logo for this era of Star Wars continuity. If you Google Grand Sith Order, you'll see what it looks like and you'll see what I mean. And as it turns out, this was also the symbol that was burned onto Sadow's forehead by the Crystal Scorpions at the beginning of this issue. So returning to our story, we see that one of the Massassi warriors intentionally plants Sadow's emblem on a dying guard. Meanwhile, in Ludo Kressh's chambers, he learns that the hangar has been invaded. So he gathers more guards and he races to confront the assailants. But before he can stop them, Sadow's Massassi warriors take off in the Starbreaker 12, bursting out of the hangar in spectacular fashion. Kressh begins to rant about how Sadow has brought the Republic down on them, and how they're all headed for ruin, until he discovers the emblem that was planted on the guard. He's playing into Sadow's hand here, because he concludes that the hangar was not in fact invaded by the Republic, but by Sadow's elite forces. At this point, Ludo Kressh retreats back to his contemplation chambers on his private world. It's a planet called Rhelg. He has summoned 2 Sith Lords to visit him. Their names are Horak-Mul and Dor-Gal-Ram. Both of them are sporting top knots, and Horak-Mul has this steampunk-styled eye patch covering one eye. They're all like, this had better be good, Kressh. We risked a lot by coming to see you. Here we learn, in an ironic turn, that some of the Sith Lords had actually considered the Republic to be a myth before Gav and Jori arrived, while Kressh wastes no time in telling them that there was another assault on the hangar and that it was staged to look like Republic forces, but that it was all a trick. He found Sadow's emblem at the site, and he's convinced that Sadow was behind the attack. So this is the Dark Lord's plan. Assault the hangar, stage it to look like a Republic attack, but also deliberately plant evidence that Kressh would just happen to find, which would reveal the dark truth. Kressh thinks that he has one up on Sadow, and that he's caught him red-handed, no pun intended. But in fact, Sadow wanted to draw Kressh out deliberately so that he could move against him as a traitor. So again, playing into Sadow's hand, and in a fit of rage, Kressh starts to use the Force by smashing a bunch of statues in his chamber. He tells the other Sith Lords to gather their forces so that they can mount a surprise attack on Sadow before he can bring downfall to the entire Empire. Meanwhile, Sadow returns to Jori on Dhelba with a message from Gav. He pulls out this amulet, and Gav appears from the amulet almost like an ancient holoprojector, and tells Jori in a pre-recorded message that Sadow has been teaching him how to use the Force in a different way, and how Sadow has made arrangements for them to return to the Republic. He promises his sister that he will see her soon. Sadow takes Jori from her cell and shows her that he has retrieved the Starbreaker 12. Not surprisingly, she's ecstatic, and immediately relieved. She checks the Navicomputer and confirms that the coordinates back to the Republic are still intact, and lo and behold, they are. Overhead, Kressh is standing at the helm of his ship in full battle armor, and he's holding onto a crystal. We get a good sense in this issue that the Sith use crystals and amulets to channel their dark side powers. They're kind of like focuses for them. And this is what Kressh says. "Power up all the weapons batteries. We must make a quick and devastating strike." When the ships begin to open fire in Sadow's quote-unquote decoy fortress, we learn that Kressh is not interested in surrender. He wants Sadow wiped out entirely. And of course, he doesn't know that this is Sadow's decoy fortress. He thinks this is his real fortress. Jori begins to panic and she starts looking for cover. In the last panel of the issue, Sadow's grinning. After all, this is exactly what he planned all along. He wanted Kressh to come and attack him. Okay, so here we go. Issue 5, the last issue of the Golden Age arc. It's titled Flight of the Starbreaker 12. The issue opens with a double-panel spread of Kressh's ships laying waste to Sadow's decoy fortress on Dhelba. Kressh is wearing his iconic ceremonial headpiece. There's these 2 big horns sticking out of it. And he's rallying his forces to attack, destroy Naga Sadow. The stain of his treachery must be obliterated from the Sith Empire. On the ground, Sadow instructs his Massassi to launch a counterattack. Turret gun emplacements from the fortress begin to fire back at the invading ships, so it's all-out war at this point. Kressh merely laughs the counterattack off and says that they're going to trounce the Dark Lord if this is the best that he can throw at them. As this is happening, Sadow ushers Jori towards the Starbreaker 12. He tells her that she needs to get to safety, and she's like, hey, hold up, I can't leave without my brother Gav. At this point, Sadow grabs her, and the comic almost makes it seem like he lays some force persuasion on her. His eyes go all loopy and the panels painted all blue, and so he tells her the following.
You have no choice. You must go now. We are under attack by a treacherous Sith Lord. If he captures you, he may be able to torture you into revealing information about the Republic.
Jori realizes that he's right, and she thanks him for his help, and she assures him that she'll be able to make it through the blockade in Starbreaker 12. After Jori enters the ship and she's out of earshot, Sadow is literally standing there like a cartoon villain with his arms crossed, and he's all like,
Yes, fly to your unsuspecting Republic. You were meant to escape alone, Jori Daragon.
He says all this out loud like a Bond villain. At this point, the story turns to Gav. He sees Massassi soldiers marching past his room, and he comes out and asks them, hey, what's going on? Well, one of them stops marching and glares at him, and he backs off. He retreats back to his room to sulk. He wonders what Naga Sadow is up to, and silently hopes that Jori is all right. In the next panel, we see a giant fleet hiding behind an asteroid, and we can tell from the markings that this fleet belongs to Sadow, because some of the ships bear that iconic Sith emblem that we saw last issue. The emblem that I talked about being the Great Sith Order emblem. Well, some of those ships have this emblem on it. We start to get a good sense of his plan: draw on his enemies, and then ambush and trap them and destroy them. In the next few panels, we see Jori navigate the Starbreaker 12 through a war zone. Kressh points the ship out through his viewport and tells his men that Sadow is in league with the Republic, and here's all the proof that you need. Before his forces can destroy the Starbreaker 12, Jori deftly maneuvers out of the way and engages the hyperdrive, escaping in the nick of time. The stars begin to stretch into lines as her ship escapes into hyperspace. Now that Jori is safely away, Sadow puts the final part of his plan in motion. He contacts his fleet in hiding, and he tells them,
Begin your attack. Strike at will until Ludo Kressh is nothing but cinders in space.
In short order, Kressh is notified of incoming warships and immediately realizes he was tricked by the Dark Lord. Sadow calls Kressh up on this ancient-looking view screen, and he starts to mock him. He explains how Kressh actually attacked his decoy fortress, and how his spies have failed him. Here's what he says.
Fool, you never should have imagined that your petty scheme could surpass my grand dreams for this empire, Kressh.
At this point, we have like this Godfather 1 montage where all of Michael Corleone's enemies get taken out all at once. First, we flash to Horak-Mul's ship, and we see his warriors turn on him and basically stab him to death like he's a Roman emperor. Next, we go to Dorgal Ram's ship. His crews drag him down off of his command platform and beat him to death. He's all like, but you're my slaves, as they're beating him, and they don't care. They destroy him and take command of his ship. And so in the next few pages of the issue, we see Sadow's fleet absolutely devastate Kressh's forces. Kressh begins to sound the retreat. He tells the remaining forces that they must leave before they are all destroyed, and he also orders any intact ships to follow him. Meanwhile, on Shian, we learn that Gav finally figured out what was going on. He's been able to monitor the battle from Sadow's true fortress. He's also aware of the fact that the Starbreaker 12 is gone and that Jori has escaped. As tears run down his cheek, he resigns himself to being Sadow's student and learning more about Sith abilities. Almost to underline this sentiment, in one of these panels, Gav is standing in front of a table covered in amulets, bubbling beakers, a skull with a crystal coming out of the top of it, an ancient scroll, and a book with an eye on the cover that looks like it came right out of the Evil Dead movies. All very important items in a Sith sorcerer's repertoire. So back to Sadow, we find him reveling in his newfound victory.
My plan has worked perfectly. Now, without question, the Sith Empire is mine. So too will be the Republic.
He tells his people that they cannot rest on their laurels because true conquest awaits. He orders all the Sith Lords to rally behind him and follow their Dark Lord into victory. The issue ends with Jori all alone in the Starbreaker 12. She promises to herself that she's going to come back for Gav. When she gets back to the Republic, she's going to find help and return. As her ship hurtles through hyperspace, we see a beeping sound coming from the side of the hull. Well, it turns out the Sith planted a tracker on her ship, and that's how they're going to follow her back to Republic space. Back in the Sith Empire, Sadow is rallying his forces, and this is what he tells them.
The Republic is ours for the taking now that Jori Daragon will lead us straight to their heart.
So that's it, my Padawan learners. We've successfully gotten through the first arc of the Tales of the Jedi, which brings us ever closer to the Knights of the Old Republic. Before I turn to my parting comments for today's episode, I wanted to read another snippet from the letters column of issue 5. You know, I used to love reading these letters columns in the old Star Wars and Marvel superheroes comics when I was a kid. Sometimes people would really ask interesting questions or make really insightful comments about the story being told. So in the Jedi Journal's letter column for issue 5, Zach Wilson of Grants Pass, Oregon writes the following. I think that you should do your best work, and please don't ruin this wonderful fictional world Mr. Lucas has created. It's dear to me and many others who have grown up with it, and I would hate to see the next generation of Star Wars fans end up getting tired of it or disliking it because of market overkill. Oh, Zach, little did you know that your impassioned plea would become a prophecy, because nearly 25 years later, this comment is still very relevant. And without getting into it too much, I think it's worth pointing out that the Tales of the Jedi and the Knights of the Old Republic were made by people who truly loved and understood Star Wars. They weren't cooked up in some corporate market-tested lab. The content creators were writing stories in an era where there were no restrictions. They had artistic license to come up with their own stories. And, of course, they come up with great things because of that, like Arba the Hutt. And, Jedi having battery packs for their lightsabers. And, of course, the Sith Empire, which draws on real-world inspiration from Egypt, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome. At its best, Star Wars is inspirational. But even if the content creators miss the mark, it's usually still a pretty good story. One of my personal fears, and we've already seen a bit of this play out in real time since the Disney acquisition, is that the market will be oversaturated with Star Wars content. I'm totally not trying to gatekeep at all, but when you're putting out 10 new shows over the course of the next few years, it's highly unlikely that all of it will be quality programming. And I hope I'm wrong about that. I sincerely do. In fact, I'll gladly eat a porg if I'm wrong about this. The last thing I want is for Star Wars fatigue to set in. Star Wars is incredibly important to a lot of people, myself included. My sincere hope is that even if it's now owned by a group whose only motive is profit, at least step aside and let the people who know and love Star Wars create content for it. That's how we end up with gems like Tales of the Jedi, and I guarantee that doing so will better serve that profit motive in the long run, because people will like these stories, they'll engage with these stories, and they'll want to consume more of the product. In the words of Princess Leia, you needn't worry about your reward. If money is all that you love, then that's what you'll receive. If you take away anything from this episode, is that there's always a relevant Star Wars quote to the discussion at hand. Anyway, I sincerely thank you for joining me on this journey. Please join me next time as we delve into the second story arc of the Tales, or as we call it, The Fall of the Sith Empire. And so may the Force be with you, always.